Hello, and welcome to our show for the love of animals. We're so glad you joined us today. We might say we're doing Buzz from the Hive 3, so we've got an interesting bee show for you. I'm Darlene Pickford.
And I'm Greg Ballard. We want to tell our viewers about a couple of upcoming shows.
Okay.
One with dealing with cancer in dogs and cats.
Ooh, yes, we.
And that's a common problem. And also allergies with dogs and cats. And I think you'll find both of those shows very interesting. But you mentioned something today, Darlene, and it went buzz, 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 buzz.
Right.
What do we have on tap for today?
Well, we've done Buzz from the Hive 1 and 2, and we're now doing, you may say Buzz from the Hive 3, but we're going to give you information about how to start your own bee colony.
Okay.
How about that, Greg?
That sounds like a very interesting topic to me. I may be ready for it after the show. I'm not sure.
Maybe so.
We have a couple of guests with us today who are local Paducah area beekeepers. On the left down there is Annie K. Broyles, and many of you have seen her in a couple of
before.
And her son-in-law Chuck Collins, who's going to demonstrate some things. Brought some equipment with him, so you see a little different setup today. And
yes.
We're so glad that the two of you took time out of your schedules to come share some information about how we can start our own bee colonies.
Glad to be here.
Thank you so
Greg.
much for being here.
Glad to be here.
Well, but first of all, tell us, how did both of you get started in the bee business?
Well, as it turns out, it was neither one of our faults.
Oh, really? Okay.
My father-in-law, Richard, 20 years ago, decided he wanted to have bees, and he started keeping bees as a hobby, and it grew and grew and grew, and pretty soon everything they did revolved around keeping bees, and of course we lost him a few years ago, but my wife and I have moved back to Paducah a few years ago, and with Annie we started a bee business, so we're happy to do that and happy to be back home with our family.
Why? And I guess that explains how you got involved in it, right, Eddie?
Well, Richard wished for bees one Memorial weekend, and when I went back to school, there was a swarm by my classroom door. So that's actually how we got into it.
Did he say why he wanted bees?
To pollinate the garden, because our cucumbers and squash had got to where they look like, well, rejects from somewhere.
Right.
Well, that's what's happened to my garden, I guess, in the last couple of years. So that might be the problem. But why don't you expand on that? Just why is it important for us to have healthy bees around?
Well, if we don't have bees, and there are other bees other insects that pollinate other than just the honeybee, but honeybees pollinate about a third of the food that we eat.
I know, that's just
apples, for instance, if you cut an apple in two and it doesn't have at least 7 to 11 seeds in it, it's not pollinated right.
Oh, really?
And if you buy a cucumber or see a cucumber or a squash that looks like a C or the little end dribbles off, they're not pollinated right. So properly shaped fruit and vegetables are the results of good pollination.
Of good.
Another good reason is the honey they produce, which is obviously very delicious. So.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And the wax and the propolis.
Well, that's very true.
And why is local honey good for us?
Local raw honey.
All right, local raw honey, okay.
It's honey that hasn't been processed in any form. And processed, I mean by heating above 120 degrees.
Right.
Or microwaved or something like that kills all the good enzymes and things that are in the honey.
Okay. Well, now, if you were to heat sometimes honey, you have to heat it up to make it so you can get to it.
If it crystallizes,
it's crystallized.
But you keep it under, just warm water will bring that back.
Oh, okay. So put it, just maybe surround it of the jar in warm water rather than putting it in the microwave.
And actually, we're the only nation that thinks we have to have liquid honey. Every other nation, if it crystallizes, they just use their spoons or whatever they dip with and dip it out.
Yeah. Well, I've done that too, but I kind of like it when I'm trying to flavor something, if it'll
be liquid.
I guess I'm one of those Americans who like it to be liquid. So. But I don't want to spoil the nutrients in it.
And I think you mentioned something on one of the previous shows, Annie, about the fact that local honey the bees will have taken out a lot of the, what's the word I want to use? Impurities. And if you get honey from another part of the country, it's been there, but it may not have taken out the impurities that you might have in your local area.
The allergies, a lot of people use honey for allergies, and
yes.
It's the pollen that they collect and bring in, and the nectar from the plants that are in the area.
In the local ones.
That people have allergies to, that helps with combating allergies in the area.
Okay. So in other words, if I'm a human and I want to combat allergies, I need local honey.
Honey that's at least from the area that has the same plants that you have in your area.
Oh, okay, okay, all right. So that would make, for simple reason, we'd say just local.
Yeah.
Okay. So how does Kentucky fare as far as being a healthy place for bees?
It probably about in the middle. It's we do a lot of row crop farming, and of course big agriculture uses insecticides and pesticides that are necessary for the production of food, and there's no doubt about that they are necessary. However, Kentucky can also have a dearth in nectar production in the summertime, where bees can certainly be stressed and not be able to collect the food that they need to maintain themselves and to produce a surplus of honey. So it can be challenging.
Yes, yes, but we're doing better than some places, right?
Absolutely, yes, ma'am. That's right.
Okay. Well, Greg, why don't we take a break before we get into the a longer session with all the equipment that we have here?
That'd be a good idea. And we've got a real interesting happy tale for you. And we'd like to thank Gail and Dudley, daughter Olivia, and son Connor. And as you see, we'll see in this little happy tale about Spice, the cat, Olivia actually produced the little motion video that you'll see with it. So I think you'll find it very interesting. So give a listen.
Spice was the last of a litter at the Humane Society. Our son and Spice found each other when our son volunteered with his school's presidential service team. Spice and his buddy Sugar Tree continue to amaze our family as they play together and become great friends.
Welcome back. We hope you enjoyed that little interesting tale about Spice and enjoyed the little video that was with it. This afternoon we're talking with Annie Broyles and with Chuck Collins about starting a bee colony. And first of all, how can our viewers get more information as they're listening to us? Let's give that a little plug for them there. Chuck, how can they get more information?
They can call me at 270-519-4772. I'm happy to talk about beekeeping.
Okay.
And certainly we have a Facebook page, facebook.com/The Bee Barn. And another great place are the Kentucky State Beekeepers Association has a lot of resources about area beekeeping associations. And if I'm not mistaken, the web address is ksbabeekeeping.org.
Okay.
And it's a great place to go learn about those resources.
Okay, and we can also call Annie, can't we?
You can call Annie, and you can reach her at the number I just gave you, the 519-4772. Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
All right, great. All right, we're at the point. I have no idea what all this equipment is, so you're going to have to start at kindergarten level for me, okay?
We'll start at the bottom and go up.
Okay.
Obviously, Darlene, this is a beehive.
Right.
and I've got some taken apart here, and just to make sure that we'll talk about the different components of it.
Okay.
Every one of the boxes it can be called a super. All of them are called hive boxes.
Okay.
But generally speaking, and this is a pretty traditional setup here in Western Kentucky. You have two large boxes that sit on the bottom, and this is where the bees live.
Okay.
And they will lay their eggs and store their food, and they survive in these two boxes here. Anything you put on above this are called honey supers.
Okay.
And there are a couple sizes of boxes that you could use as honey supers. This is called a medium box. The one I'm holding in my hand is shorter by about an inch. It's called a shallow super. But this is where the bees will store their surplus honey, and this is where we harvest them from.
Okay.
And inside these boxes are called frames that hold a foundation, either made of wax or wax-coated plastic, and the bees will draw this out and make their cells and their honeycomb, and where they'll store their food and lay their eggs and grow their young baby bees.
And this is in this area.
And this will be this exactly
This
right.
area.
This is in this area right here, and this is a deep frame. You can see it matches the
Right.
the height of this, and of course each one of the smaller boxes has frames that match its height as well.
Okay.
And but starting at the bottom, the bottom of the hive is called a bottom board, and there's a couple different styles of these. Obviously, you can choose to use, and then each one of the hive boxes on top, there is a top cover, but there's also a part on the top of that. It's called an inner cover, and an inner cover does a couple of things. It separates the top of the box from the lid so that the lid can be removed rather easily,
Right.
but also provides an airspace between the bees and the outside so that they can get some ventilation, and also helps with the moisture that the bees do create as they live in the hive. They actually respirate like we do, so they're on a cold day.
Moisture in the
That's
bottom.
right. It'll help
You
them get
have
rid of that and help
condensation.
make sure that they have plenty of ventilation. So the inner cover helps in that respect. Now, and again, these are all pretty typical configurations and typical boxes, but there's all different options that somebody could have. There's configurations that have all medium boxes. There's configurations that have only 8 frames instead of 10 frames. These boxes here hold 10 frames across here, just like this one we're looking at here.
Okay.
And again, I brought this as an example. Again, this is the
This is
large.
what's in one of the drawers.
That's
Yeah.
correct. That's correct.
Okay.
And but again, as the bees develop and the colony grows and matures, they'll start in one box and with this lid right on top of the first box, and then you'll add the second one as they fill this one up, and then the honey supers as they go up to store again their excess food sources that they'll provide. So
How many how many boxes could you have here, or how large a hive?
well, this is a pretty typical,
That's typical.
standard sizes, and again, there's many beekeepers will make their own equipment, but they have to keep in mind that in order for them to be compatible with other equipment, they should all make them the same size. So they should
Gotcha.
they should be the same size,
I got you.
and at least the width and the depth and the ability to use a frame. And
Where's
again,
the queen bee in all this?
the queen's going to be in these 2 boxes right here.
Okay.
Again, she's going to have an area here in the center. If you can imagine a basketball in the center of this box,
Okay.
that's the area that she's going to lay eggs, and they're going to raise their young bees. And around that, they're going to store their own food, their pollen and their honey.
Right.
And again, as they move up here, all they're going to do is store their surplus honey again up here, and this is where we harvest the honey from.
Okay.
So if you do anything, you always leave these alone, and you can take your honey from up here. That's
here.
that's the message that you can learn from looking at this.
Okay.
And in order for them to extend this out to where they can put honey into it to make the cone, the bees have to eat at least about 10 pounds of honey to make a pound of wax. And there's
Wow.
certain days of their life that they produce wax, and they have slits in their abdomen that they produce wax out
Are you talking
of.
about the worker
The worker
bees,
bees.
Okay.
That's correct.
And the worker bees are all female.
Oh, yeah. Don't we know that?
Yeah.
No offense, dear.
The queen again is in charge of laying eggs and producing the number of bees. The worker bees, as they mature, have different jobs, whether they take care of the young larvae and the young bees, or they're foragers and later in their life. So the male bees are called drones, and of course their only job is reproduction. That's all
Right.
they do. And it's very common in the fall and late in the summertime that you'll see the hive start throwing the drones out. They'll throw them out because they don't want to feed them over the summer.
Over the winter.
Or over the winter, I'm sorry. And again, the colony protects the queen, but the queen also works at their behest. If they don't think she's doing a good job, they'll replace her.
Oh, really?
They do. They will. And so one of the problems that a beekeeper can have is a hive that actually loses a queen for some reason.
Right.
And whether she may be injured or something like that, but or she comes to the end of her useful reproductive life.
Right.
And again, if she's not laying eggs like they think like she should be, they'll replace her and make a new queen, ideally.
Very, very interesting.
So.
What else do we have here?
Oh, of course, here's some tools we brought, and of course, this is a smoker. There's a lot of beekeepers that use these a lot. What we use as fuel, a lot of times you can use packed cotton or even pine needles, which work very good. They make a cool white smoke, but the smoke that you apply to the bees actually doesn't calm them down. The smoke actually tells them their house is on fire, and so they start gorging themselves on honey. So once they start, it's actually the honeys that calms them down. But smoking bees early in the year, in the spring and the summer, normally it's not necessary because they're a lot calmer. There's fewer bees. Later in the summer, when it's hot and if there's not a lot of food out there to forage for, they're gonna be very protective. So it may be necessary to use a smoker to calm them down when you're trying to
encourage them to eat the honey, which then calms them down.
That's right. This is called a hive tool, and there's many different variations of it. And people ask, well, why do you have to have a special tool as a beekeeper? Well, these boxes, and again, once the bees have drawn the comb out, stored their food, these could weigh as much as 100 pounds apiece.
Ooh.
And the bees are very good about sticking them all together. And so in order to try to remove the boxes or separate the boxes, a very strong tool is necessary to use to separate those boxes. This is a bee brush, also known as a bee aggravator. But as you can take frames out to look at a beehive, you can use this to brush the bees off and not hurt them. It's a very soft brush, but that'll help the beekeeper in trying to manage his bees when he's looking at them. So, but that's the basic components of our beehive that we brought here today. Okay.
All righty.
This is absolutely fascinating.
Yes, it is. It certainly is.
We want to take just a short break now and let you hear about a happy tale about a little cat that has been with Darlene and myself for quite a while, Woody. And you'll find him a very interesting cat. He has a very interesting history, so give a listen.
Woody is a 12 or possibly 13-year-old short-haired male cat with tuxedo markings. His first 2 years were spent as a feral cat in the wilds of Lyon County, Kentucky. Darlene found him outside our house and fell in love with him. After several attempts, she was able to trap him and took him to a vet to have him checked out and neutered. When she brought him home, a friend advised her to let him go back into the woods. If he's meant to come back, he will, said the friend. The release happened on Valentine's Day, and Darlene's heart was broken, fearing that she would never see him again. 9 days later, he came back to the house and has been there ever since as a wonderful companion to Darlene, Greg, and the other cats in the house. He had to learn how to play with toys and adjusted well to living inside. He always wants to know where Darlene is and is living proof that a feral cat can be housebroken to become a wonderful and loving companion.
Welcome back. We hope you enjoyed that happy tale. And this afternoon we're talking with Annie Broyles and Chuck Collins about starting your own bee colony. And we mentioned it before, but again, how can our viewers get more information, Chuck, about bees and beekeeping?
Sure, Greg. The Kentucky State Beekeepers Association has a great website, ksbabeekeeping.org. And of course, they can reach out to me personally at 270-519-4772 and find us on Facebook at The Bee Barn, which is a great place to go. Absolutely.
All right, sounds good.
Now we've looked at the basic equipment, what we need here. Next question, what's it going to cost me to do this?
Well, Greg, I tell people you can kind of pay as you go if you like, but the Kentucky Department of Agriculture had put out a pamphlet recently, and they estimate that a first-year beekeeper might spend as much as $500 for pretty much what you see here. This is what a typical beekeeper would use, but the $500 includes bees, and it also includes protective equipment like this that I highly recommend, and which would include gloves and your small tools that you'd like to have. And of course, after that, maybe $100 a year that you'd spend on a hive to maintain it with medications and things like that. So,
and that's not as much as a big screen TV.
Not anymore. No.
A lot more
Would your $500 be spent all at one time, or?
Yeah, pretty much you would. Again, you'd buy your equipment. Of course, this is a one-time cost. You'd always have this,
right?
And you'd always have your hat and veil and gloves. And again, your bees would cost anywhere from $100 to $150, depending on how you got them. No, then that would be a one-time cost. But again, the beekeeper then is charged with making sure they thrive and survive, and they're people who like to have bees, they like to think that they take care of themselves. Well, they're like a pet. They're like a cat or a dog. You have to make sure they're healthy, that they have enough food to eat, and as a beekeeper, you're responsible to make sure that to give that to them.
Let's suppose it's the winter and they don't have enough to eat. Then what do you do?
Sure. There's it's very common that a beekeeper will feed their colonies sugar water. It's a 1-to-1 sugar to water ratio, and the bees will use that to live on and thrive on. A higher ratio of sugar to water they'll actually store. They'll store in their hive for use as they need to. Absolutely.
Now that's just regular sugar.
Granulated sugar, yes, ma'am.
Regular granulated sugar. Okay. And how do you administer to it if you mix it?
There's feeders that you can use to put on the front porch or in the hive, or just out in the open. But out in the open, obviously, you're inviting everything else to snack at your
Where
goodies
would
that
you
you're
put
giving
them in the hive?
You would actually use one of these boxes to hide the feeder, but there are also feeders that fit inside the box here that keep it all inside. Yes, it would prevent robbing from other insects.
Yes,
and other bees.
Okay.
And other bees. So.
Well, tell us about your new fashion equipment there.
Well, our fashion equipment is a real simple jacket. It's and again, this is a typical jacket that a beekeeper would use. It's 100% cotton twill. There's tons of options out there for different people to use, in the hat and the veil. And again, this is great protection for a beekeeper. And I'll tell you that everybody says that these are great for beekeeping, but they're not completely sting proof. They're sting resistant, and but if they get wet, if you get wet wearing the suit, the bees can still get through it. But it does help, and keeps the bees away from your face. And of course, the gloves have long sleeves on them, so you can pull them up over the sleeves of your jacket. So. Mm-hmm.
And how often would you use this? Every time you do what?
I do every time I open the lid, only because I'd rather not get stung, and certainly that's a possibility.
Right.
And again, like we talked about earlier, bees in the spring are very more docile than they would be later in the summer.
Okay.
And it may not be necessary. Sometimes you'll go out there and say, I really didn't need to wear my suit there. But the first time that you go out there and you don't have your suit on is the time that they're going to get pretty irritated with you. That can happen.
Does time of day make a difference? I know, for example, like wasps are much more sluggish in the morning, and in the afternoon they're much more alive. What about bees?
I think the temperature has a lot to do with that, Greg. The temperature and the time of day, of course, kind of would relate to each other. The cooler they are, the less active they are. So the warmer it is, the more active they are.
Okay.
Okay.
And another thing, mowing. If you're going to use a lawnmower of any sort or weed eater around a beehive, I suggest wearing a suit, because if you happen to throw grass at them, it makes them very unhappy.
Oh, which is it? Where environmentally would you place this beehive?
Oh, sure. This is generally speaking, you'd want a beehive in the full sunshine.
Full sunshine.
And afternoon shade is okay. But you wouldn't want to keep it in a full shade area, because one of the pests that bother bees is called a small hive beetle, and they love the shade.
Okay.
And the hotter it is in the hive, the better it is. The bees don't care. The bees keep their cluster in their brood about 90 degrees anway, so it's not going to affect them.
So the more sunshine, the better.
The more sunshine, the better. Generally, you'd have it facing either west to south, so that we get the earliest morning sun that it can.
Okay. And now I notice we've got it on a table. How would it be? Flat on the ground or what?
This is about the right height. You'd want to have it probably. It's very common that the beekeepers will put them on cinder blocks, concrete blocks, or a couple of rails or something like that. So it's
if you had
a couple feet off the
rain,
ground. Absolutely, yeah, a couple feet off the ground is just fine. I've seen them very low to the ground. I've also seen them 2 or 3 feet in the air, which can be problematic once you're starting to take honey supers off that weigh 100 pounds. So
Yes.
this is about right.
Okay. And now in the winter, how do these bees survive?
Well, the bees will cluster together, and what I mean by cluster, we talked about that basketball earlier that they have in the basketball size area. They're going to cluster together really tight the colder it gets. The queen is in the center, and they're actually going to generate their own heat there'll be bees that'll put their heads in the cells and work their flight muscles to generate heat, and the bees on the outside insulate that cluster. And they'll as the one wears out, they'll switch places with the ones on the outside. they'll eat and they'll get re-energized. But the queen is in the center of the cluster, so the colder it is, the smaller the cluster gets. The tighter the cluster gets. The warmer it is, the more they can expand and move around inside the hive.
Okay.
Oh, okay. So, and I guess rain, getting it off the ground to protect it from, water. Frost, is this what you described?
Right.
How about ice?
Ice is actually an insulator when you think about it.
Really?
Yeah. Again, the bees, in the wintertime, they're going to keep their cluster warm. They're not going to keep the whole hive warm.
Right.
But the hive will give them some protection against the wind and the elements. It'll still be cold in there, but the cluster of bees that are in there will stay warm.
Okay.
Provided they have ample food to eat. So.
I'm with you now.
And for those of viewers who might be interested in what the whole activity and the process that bees use, let us reference you back to Buzz from the Hive 1 and Buzz from the Hive 2,
Yes.
a couple of our previous programs for more information about the actual process of the mating and bee making and things like that. So.
And that can be seen at www.paducah2.org/videoclips/animals. Or it's actually on YouTube and Facebook if you search for it, right? So
that first website takes you to
the others.
to the YouTube, but the Facebook you have to do separately.
Okay.
At that point. So.
All right, returning to our fashion garments there, what do I do if I did get stung?
Well, everybody reacts a little differently, and certainly bee stings are painful. There's no doubt about that. And,
Right.
and if someone interested in keeping bees, they need to understand one thing: they will get stung.
At some time, okay.
At some point, you will get stung. Generally, people have swelling around the sting area and things like that, and there's things that you can put on topically that help that, and also some antihistamines and things like that you could take. But again, everybody reacts a little differently.
Yeah. But if you were by any reason think that you might be really allergic, you should know this ahead of time.
Certainly, absolutely.
Right.
And again, I would advise anybody if they have any problems breathing or anything like that, they should go to the hospital right away. So
Yes,
they should seek medical attention right away.
I'll tell you, this has just been an absolutely fascinating
Yes, it
time,
is.
Chuck and Annie. We certainly do appreciate you coming today, and who knows where I'm not sure I'm ready to start a bee colony yet, but
I think I've got a little Morgan house, or whatever it's called, hanging in my backyard.
but we would like to thank both of you for
Yes.
coming this afternoon and sharing your knowledge with us and information, and we've given you references to our viewers, how they can get in touch with you if
Yes.
they're interested, and so thanks again for coming
Yes, thank
today.
you so much
been
for
a
sharing
pleasure.
your information. We're
Yes.
just, I asked somebody, what could we do? And they said, we just need 500 volunteers to start becoming beekeepers in Kentucky if we want to do a lot for our environment. So any of our viewers, locally or not locally, if you're thinking about getting into it, look into it very carefully and maybe give it serious consideration. It's a good hobby to be in.
In closing, Darlene,
I'm Darlene.
I'm Greg, and give your pet a little extra love today
And
every
every day.
day. See you next time.
Even the bees.